Agriculture has predominantly been a man's world. And it's funny because U.S. Secretary of Ag, Sonny Perdue, refers to me as the chief farm girl in Missouri. That's in a title that I embrace. A lot of people would be offended by it, but I think it's something we have to celebrate, the fact that women can be in agriculture. It's in my farm, on our farm, we don't have jobs that were dedicated and separated per, your gender. We're equal opportunity. If you have the skill and the ability to do the job, you jump in and you get the work done. We don't have an abundance of help sitting around on the family farm. And so it was just one of those things that I had never experienced being treated as anything other than an equal outside of my family. And so as Kevin and I became more involved in leadership organizations, volunteering, it was then that I realized that not every woman has the same opportunity that I do on our family farm to be treated as an equal. And so that really opened my eyes. It's easy to get discouraged about, when you get the comments of, you need to be home taking care of your babies. But for me, that's just a challenge that I prove to them that I'm equal and I am deserving of the role that I'm in, and I can work just as hard as any man because I put my pants on just like they do, one leg at a time. And, so that's something that's really important for me, is that the next generation of leaders in agriculture, for the younger women behind me, that they know that don't get caught up in the comments that may seem sexist or derogatory towards them, to embrace that as a challenge, to make them work even harder to prove to everyone that we deserve our seat at the table. So, Teresa, she actually has the opportunity right now to be serving on a public school board. That is not a fun job right now. It's often a job that's very thankless. You hear lots of complaints. Very seldom do you ever get to hear a compliment. So Teresa, would you mind sharing with us how the Greater Missouri Leadership Challenge has connected your service to the Columbia Public School Board of Education, and how your opportunity through this organization has helped you in the role that you're in today?
Just regret I'm not seeing you in person, but greetings to everybody. And I would go back, I guess, Chris, to when the Greater Missouri Leadership Challenge, basically, as we've talked about, introduces women to some of the bigger issues and challenges facing Missouri and also our country. And then it encourages the participants to find a way that they can personally try to address the problems. And so I think that theme has carried through on my community involvement, and particularly was important for my reason for running for the school board. Upon retirement, I thought I would have the time and the energy to support public schools. And I've always been a huge proponent of public schools here in Columbia and also in Kansas City when I worked there for Commerce Bank for 16 years. And through adopting children, I had really understood the importance of early childhood education. So that's always been a tremendous interest of mine. Then fast forward to running for the school board, one of the things I really felt was important is for us to try to close the achievement gap for our children. And then it's been a process, a learning process, though, as I've gone through, in that one of the things that we're finding, and this is true in all communities, is that our lower income children, the ones that we can maybe classify as free and reduced lunch, oftentimes have the largest challenges for education and represent some of the larger percentages in the achievement gap. But then I also had to go through the thought process when we were recently redistricting or considering redistricting, and found that the community wanted to use redistricting as an opportunity to provide greater equity among the schools. But then when options were presented that required longer bus routes, more time for families to try to get to their schools, they felt they wouldn't be able to participate as much or be as engaged, or what if their child missed the bus and couldn't get to school? So then needing to dig into that a little bit more, recognizing that it's really important that in our communities and within the state of Missouri, that we really work towards changing and improving some of the structural challenges within given school districts so that our neighborhoods can be equal opportunities. There's data that shows not only going to a mixed income school improves school performance or academic performance, but there's also strong data that if children grow up in an, I'm going to refer to as an equal opportunity neighborhood, that they also are more successful in school. So I think it's recognizing that equity in education is greatly tied to economic opportunity. And so now I'm using the school board as, in a sense, a launching point to work more with our challenges on affordable and workforce housing in Columbia. So with the goal that at one point our neighborhoods really will reflect the equity that we want within our schools and also within our community.
You know, I had always counseled small business owners and you know, provided resources for them, but I always, in my heart, in my gut, wanted to be an entrepreneur myself. So my husband had started, and I helped him early on start a business about in 2013, a multimedia production company that had obviously a focus on that, you know, a competency, cultural competency too, in Latino marketing, Spanish language marketing. And in 2016, we were able to, we developed a third-party professional broadcasting platform for sports. And our first client, our first customer rather, or partner, was Kansas City Chiefs. My husband became not just a producer in our company, not just a producer, but he also became the color commentator for the Chiefs in Spanish. And then we built out a whole broadcasting platform, and it was a lot of fun. I love sports. I was still at the Central Exchange, and I figured, well, you know, we started getting a lot of traction, and I told my husband, I think we've got an idea here. I think we've got something that we could scale and move into other NFL teams. And so I know in order to do that, because his hands were full on the production side, that I probably needed to join the company full time and focus just on the sports end. So in 2017, I did that. I left my full-time job at Central Exchange and decided to help and run the business. Took my own advice and we were certified as a minority-owned business and a small business owner, business-owned enterprise. And within about a month, I joined the company in April. And in May, we landed the Oakland Raiders. We landed our second team, which was really fun. And, you know, it was much like Kristy Chastain. I was the only woman in the room, certainly the only minority in the room working with these NFL teams. But a lot of fun. I was able to lean on all the great work that's at Central Exchange with, you know, how to expand your presence and all those things when you're working with a very male-dominated field. But as luck would have it, I was getting ready for another journey that I hadn't anticipated that would require every bit of grit or resilience that I had ever thought that I had. We were traveling when we received word that we were going to start working with the Raiders. We were super excited. That's one in the Spanish language and Latino engagement. The Raiders are them and the Cowboys. They're the two biggest brands for sports, other than like the Yankees, for fan engagement. And so we were really excited. But we were traveling and, you know, back and forth to the West Coast. And I, you know, had been used to kind of burning the candle at both ends, you know, with high energy work and then, you know, playing hard and what have you and entertaining clients. I started to feel really tired. I mean, I was really tired, and I just chalked it up to, like a lot of women, working women, and that are trying to juggle a lot of things, you know, I'm just fatigued. I probably need to slow down. Well, about several weeks later, it wasn't going away. And so, you know, we were up against the preseason starting in August, and we had a lot of things to do. But went to the doctor, and sure enough, I was diagnosed with cancer. So I was trying to then, you know, juggle, you know, my health and what I needed to be doing for my health and treatment with trying to build this business. And So, you know, really, it tested everything I have. But it also forced me to focus on the things that are really important in life. And I think that I was able to have a whole other set of lessons learned when you're trying to build a business and you're trying to build your health back and get back to normal. So anyway, I've been able to do that, and but not without a lot of trials and tribulations over the past few years. I've been, you know, going through treatment and finally ending up with the bone marrow transplant last winter, and I'm recovering from that. I feel really strong, but in the process, I was managing to still work and build our business, and we went on to work. We've gone on to work with since then the Baltimore Ravens, the Jacksonville Jaguars. We stood up the hockey team, San Jose Sharks. We're now working with Philadelphia Eagles. We just signed this year, and we're working with KU and Nebraska Cornhuskers. So I've been able to still manage to do that, while trying to recover from, you know, the cancer bout. But you know, COVID handed us another set of challenges, but I was already in quarantine, so I kind of fit right into what's happening with COVID. But we were able to, you know, a couple of things that I was able to draw on some of the lessons that I'd learned earlier. And one of them was I had to get back to the basics when, you know, the business started to go south early on in March and April, like a lot of small businesses. We started losing clients. The sports business went down the crapper, you know, because of, you know, there wasn't any, at that point, nobody knew what was going to happen for the seasons. But we were able to pivot and quickly. And now we're doing a boatload of virtual events. We're doing virtual galas. We've been able to totally shift our business model. And it's, you know, enabled us to prepare too for what's post-COVID.
The disadvantage that our rural communities have right now when it comes to access to affordable high-speed internet. When all of our schools closed and the kids got sent home and parents were sent home to work, we have dial-up internet in some places in rural Missouri still. 1.2 million Missourians don't have access to internet, and over 61% of them are in our rural communities. And so it became an even bigger challenge for us because we knew in agriculture it had been difficult before, but it just highlighted that challenge and escalated it to that next level. You know, in my rural community, when COVID happened, our doctor's office shut down. So if you got something that was COVID-like symptoms and you wanted to go to the doctor, they weren't seeing anybody. But telehealth also wasn't an option for many people in our rural communities because they didn't have good enough internet at home. And so that's really been a challenge. For women in agriculture, so many of us communicate in a network over social media because it's hard. It's hard to connect with other women in agriculture. And so sometimes your community isn't your local community, but it includes women in California and Kansas and New York, all across the nation. And so when we weren't able to have internet access that was better than what it had been, because when everybody got sent home to use it, when you're on DSL or you're on the dial-up system, your internet got even slower. And so it just escalated the challenge that we've seen in our rural communities of being able to take care of things on the farm that continue to take care of your family as well at the same time. It also highlighted for us the need to make sure that people understand the important role that women do play in agriculture. People were shocked how involved women were on family farms today. And so we want to make sure that, you know, we're not downgrading men in the agriculture industry because we're equal. And I think that's something that we've all been working very hard to make sure people understand. We're not trying to be the superior gender. We just want to be equal. And, you know, I'm really fortunate in the cabinet under Governor Parson. There are 11 women, I believe, out of the 16 cabinet positions. And so I have a really great network of strong women in leadership roles that I can lean on during difficult times. And that's exactly what we did when COVID hit.
I was very fortunate to have people in the background that were providing that level of advocacy. And I tried to do that for other women behind me, you know, even, you know, in civic service. And I know, Teresa, you serve on several boards and, you know, what have you, as I do. when I'm there at those tables, I know that I'm also a placehold for women behind me. Particularly in my case, I'd like to champion women of color to make sure that it's not just my seat that they're going to fill, but it's a couple. But I believe that there are many examples of, that I've had. I've been, really fortunate to have some great women that I've been able to call on, and hopefully I've been equally, I've given that back to them too.
I've always been interested in politics since a young girl. I never necessarily anticipated running for an office, and for some crazy reason, I don't really view the school board as a political office, but it can be, and right now it is maybe more so than typically. But I believe that it takes people that really care about the topic to run for office. And I also vividly remember when I was in Kansas City, I felt really strongly about my children attending public schools. I lived on the Missouri side, and they went through the magnet schools. And I remember that at least in that time period, there was a lot of discord on the school board, and it seemed like it was detrimental to the students and the teachers and the superintendent. So when I was encouraged to run here locally, I felt that it was a point where I could be of service. And that's the way I viewed it, because I cared about the students, I cared about equity, and I felt it was my responsibility and obligation to serve. I was glad that I did, as I did take a little bit of time when I first moved back to kind of take a view of the different organizations that were doing the most impactful work within our community, and try to engage with them and get involved, so that, because there's so many good causes, and it's really difficult sometimes to direct your energy towards the ones that are going to have the highest impact.
Don't be afraid to walk through a door that gets opened unexpectedly. There have been so many great opportunities that I've taken in my lifetime that my first gut reaction was, I don't think I can do that. I don't think I'm prepared. It's not the right time. I'm too busy. And the best experiences and the best learning opportunities that I've had have happened when I opened that door wider that got opened that I was afraid to walk through. A perfect example was becoming the director of agriculture.
Yeah, I think you really need to, I should have listened to Mike, and I think you need to listen to yourself and know that sometimes you just have to pull that Band-Aid off, really quick, and deal with the consequences quickly, as opposed to what could happen later on or down the road, because it just gets messier. It doesn't go away. It just gets a little bit messier. So I think that's one. And the other one is being more strategic in my networking early on. I think, like a lot of us, I say yes to a lot of things, which has been actually far better, far more positive for me than the negative. But I think if I would have had been more of a strategic networker up front, it probably would have saved me a lot of time. So going in with a plan. And now when I talk to young people, I tell them, you need to have a civic plan and a career plan.
I think all of us in this community, we should pull each other up. And so while this has pushed some women out of the workforce, or maybe they're not in their offices anymore, they're feeling a little bit sheltered and at home and out of their norm and feel a little bit boxed in. I think it's up to all of us to reach out to each other and encourage each other and pull each other up, and find that person who feels like they've been put in that box and pull them out of it.
At that time, I was, as you mentioned, with Toastmaster, a portable appliance manufacturer, and we went through, during that time, a leveraged buyout, acquisitions, mergers, all of which over a period of time led to an ultimate acquisition where I left that particular organization thinking, okay, this is the sunset of my career. I'll sort of look at something else. And I started at Landmark Bank, where I was going to be for just a few years, and I ended up staying 13. But ultimately, the story there is, maybe from my perspective, as you mentioned, I've been in long-term careers in multiple places, and I've been on both the acquiring side and the side that was not acquired. And so I had an opportunity to experience many of the things that go along with a fallout and many of the opportunities that sometimes come with a change in norm. And I know that in our current environment, there are probably a number of women, who are being impacted either for the good or not, who are experiencing that as well. So maybe if there's some information I could provide or a contact I can become in those situations, I would love to talk about that. But as fun as it is to look back, I think most of us are at this point looking forward. And I've had an opportunity briefly to meet the other women who are going to talk today. And I think we have many interesting stories that we have before us. I know that Maxine started in the corporate world and then went into owning her own business. And I think she can probably share many experiences along that line as well. So any questions you have, I would be happy to answer. If you'd like my contact information, I'd be glad to share that as well.
And one of the businesses that I personally loved was the shoe business, because I'm 4'10", and one thing I could wear and walk out of a store wearing and not have to alter is a pair of shoes. And so I was always looking at shoe companies. And one of the companies that I discovered was the Volume Shoe Company, or Payless Shoe Source, which was located in Kansas. And I brought that to the attention of David Farrell, and he said, go look at it, go meet them. And it was a family business, 2 cousins living in Topeka, the most amazing men you could ever imagine. And their joy was teaching me about the business. And we eventually acquired that business. And eventually, 10 years later or so, maybe 15, I was named the president of Payless. And I felt like it was really a family business. So I had to move to Topeka, Kansas and adjust to that. And I learned from them charity, how much corporations can contribute to a community. Not so much charity, but philanthropy, growing a community, because Topeka was not exactly the center of the universe of philanthropy. There are a few good companies there, and the Poses family was very much engaged in growing the Topeka community. And it really intrigued me how they had done that. And even though I wasn't from Topeka and didn't really want to live there, to be honest with you, I was commuting on weekends back to St. Louis. I learned a lot about how a small community works and how integral all of the things like education and the city council and the government and all of those things work together, especially in a state capital. So when May Company decided to spin off Payless as a separate private company, I had the opportunity to stay and be the president and keep going, or to kind of take my money and run. And I decided at 48 years old, I was going to take my money and run, not go and retire and play golf, but I was going to do something different. And I did not know what that was. I just knew that it was going to be my own business. The internet was 1996. The internet was coming on really strong. And I knew I wanted to be engaged in that. And one day, I was out, I was back home, and I was, doing things with my friends, and picked up my friends' kids from school, and we stopped to get a Beanie Babies at one of the toy stores in St. Louis. And when Katie, my 10-year-old friend, couldn't get the one she wanted, she said, these are so easy, we could make these. And I said, I saw this in my head. It was a Willy Wonka explosion. And at 48 years old, I was still having Willy Wonka moments, thank goodness. And 9 months later, we opened our first store at the St. Louis Galleria. I knew how to do this because I'd opened up thousands of Payless stores and thousands of May Company stores. So I did know how to do it. We grew the big company. One of the things that I remember about this with banks, no offense to any of the bankers, now that there's women bankers in the banking business, I couldn't get anybody to give me a line of credit in St. Louis. They wanted my husband to sign it. They wanted us to sign over on their home. And so I wanted to get the business going, and I needed the line of credit, so I did that. But eventually we had to go to Cincinnati to find a bank that would support the Build-A-Bear Workshop. And we stayed with that bank all through those years of that. Eventually, because of the way banks merged, they became U.S. Bank. And U.S. Bank had turned me down in St. Louis. But then they said, well, now that we're merging these banks, why don't we take it over in St. Louis? I said, no, I'm staying in Cincinnati. Charles was a great friend. And actually, Richard Davis was the banker who became the president of U.S. Bank, who approved the loan in the first place. So I'll be forever indebted to Richard and to the people at Star Bank, then First Bank, then U.S. Bank, for believing that a woman can run a big business. And by the time they really came in, we were a multi-million-dollar business, and we went public in less than 7 years. So that was another thing. I think we're the last. I'm not positive about this. I know in St. Louis, we're the last company that the only female company that's gone public in the last 20 years. And I don't know if we're the most recent, but but we are the only woman. It was a really big deal to be on the New York Stock Exchange. All of that after 48 years old. So now as you can see behind me is my next project, which is to reinvent the north side of St. Louis, Missouri, which has got great communities. And I got here through education. I'm going to turn this over to Julie in a minute, but I was working on a KIPP school, a KIPP charter school here in the St. Louis neighborhood, and in the neighborhood where this hospital is. And one day, literally, I was coming home from the school. I just decided to take a right turn instead of a left turn. And I came around the side of this building and they were putting the for sale sign in. I did not know what this building was. I later found out it was St. Luke's, the original St. Luke's Hospital, built in 1904 around the World's Fair. And I started digging into what could this be? What could we turn this into? And we had an example in St. Louis, Cortex, but I wanted it to be a hub. My initial vision was for it to be a hub of education, where we bring everybody together to kind of charter school, private school, public school, early childhood education, and really strategize what's possible for children in the St. Louis region and even in Missouri.
Later on, I became the coordinator of multicultural education for the Columbia Public Schools. And this was a fascinating job. I had been a parent and had children in school, but I was appointed to see if I could help figure out what we needed to do to make education more inclusive in the Columbia Public Schools. And so I worked very closely with the teachers and the administrators and also with the students. And the idea was to learn how to infuse diversity and multiple perspectives into the curricula and make sure that the climate at the schools all across Columbia were inclusive and welcoming to all students where they could excel. Later on, I actually ended up in higher education, and many of you know of my experience here. I was a professor, an adjunct associate professor in the College of Education, and I taught school organization and administration for teachers, and also a leadership seminar, and then education in its social contexts. And the idea behind that is that when we teach, we're not just teaching in a vacuum. What we're doing is we're teaching children, and children come from a variety of backgrounds and from a variety of experiences, and teachers have to be aware of those experiences in order to be effective in educating those young people. Later on, I became assistant to the vice provost at the University of Missouri, and this was a campus-wide position, but I also focused on academic affairs and also on minority affairs campus-wide at the university. And I immensely enjoyed that experience as well. The final position that I had at the university was in extension. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with extension, but extension is the outreach function of the university. And there are faculty members in all 114 counties delivering the resources and the programs from the university, the 4 universities, into the community. And in that role, I was a system-wide program director, working with all 114 counties, and also working with the 4 University of Missouri campuses. And I focused on youth development programming and human environmental sciences programming, and also community betterment. And then in that same role, I actually had a change of title at one point, and I became the Director of Organizational Development. And in that role, I actually participated in a number of special projects. And that was probably the most fascinating role for me because I worked on professional development with faculty and staff. I developed an orientation program for all of our employees. We had about 1,400 employees in extension. I developed a revenue generation plan because universities, even though we have state and local funding and federal funding, we have to find other ways to attain funding in order to get our work done. And so I worked on revenue generation plans and partnership plans and developing grants and all of that. So it was certainly a fascinating time for me. But actually, my career may sound as though it were traditional, but really it was not a traditional career because I actually took 15 years out of my workplace and worked at home with my children. And I just raised my children at that time, and I volunteered in their classes. And it's really interesting because, you know, it's difficult when you make a decision like that. It was hard for me because I always thought that I would be a consummate professional and I was going to go straight through with my employment. But actually making that decision to stay home was a difficult one, but I am delighted that I made that decision. It was a great decision for me. But, you know, I do want to emphasize that it was important for me because I had the opportunity to make that choice. And I think that as women, we don't always know that we have that kind of choice. But it's important for other women to empower those women when they make those choices, uplift and support them. Because for me, very often women were saying, why are you staying home? You'll never get back into the workforce. Aren't you lonely for adult company? These kinds of things. But I think it's important for all of us to empower women when they make those choices and uplift and support them.
So I've been a prosecutor for over 20 years, left that role at times throughout those 20 plus years, but always found the road always led me back to the prosecuting attorney's office. And it's really great work and hard, incredibly hard work, especially right now at this time in American history. And we've been here before. So I'm really hopeful prosecutors will take on a greater importance, that we will take on greater roles in our community and actually lead, you know, instead of being on the sidelines and allowing others, you know, to kind of speak for us in this space. So one of the things I found in my position, and it was because of a female leader I had before me, who I watched a lot of people have this role, but when, Claire McCaskill had the job, the elected prosecutor job, I got to watch how she engaged and interacted with the community around her. And I decided I'd really like to work for her. I would really like to work in that kind of environment where she wasn't just a prosecutor. She was also about rebuilding, repairing community and trying to reach into community. And, again, that was probably 25 years ago that I started as an intern in that office and then worked my way up to the position that I have now. My role, my leadership is a little bit different than my predecessors. But for me, it is about building coalitions, really working on partnerships, but not just the traditional partnerships, to, kind of look out, widen your scope about who else might be able to fit in this overall model of, making our community a safer and better place for everyone to live. Looking at it through that racial equity lens, which I think folks in, I was going to say in criminal justice, but there's not a field that should not be a focus for everyone. But it really, really must have a focus in my field of criminal justice, because we have done a lot of harm to communities of color. And I think leading with that acknowledgement is a bare bones essential line to start from. But then what are you going to do to correct? What can be done to correct that history, and how can we maybe for once attain the ideals of what all of our founding documents aspired us to be. So that says that's a lot, those are big aspirations, but they're possible. They are possible. So for a prosecutor should not be at their desk. A prosecutor should be engaged in community. And in fact, while we've been sitting here, I made plans to, go out to a particular community this afternoon with another individual that's engaged in drug treatment, so that we can maybe go at a problem in a little bit different way, than that traditional law enforcement approach. So I think that my leadership role is really based on a couple of tenets. One, it is about building partnerships, building coalitions, but also not being afraid to lead. And those are some hard lessons that I've learned over time, because I am a bit conflict avoidant. You wouldn't know that by probably looking at news media about me, but I really am. I don't seek conflict. But you know what, folks? Sometimes conflict's it's gonna come. And I think for women leaders, if there's anything I can say today is don't hide from it. Don't apologize for it. I've done too much apologizing for the conflict that I have found that has encountered into my world. But lead through it, lead through it. And you can still lead through conflict with compassion, with your mission first and foremost of not changing, your fundamentals about who you are and what you're about. But women should not hide from conflict, even though we're graded on a much sharper test than our male counterparts about how we engage in conflict and how we manage ourselves. And good heavens, don't look angry ever. Sometimes I'm really pissed off, by the way. Sometimes a conflict really makes me angry. And it's okay, I think, to lead through that as well, as long as you've got some other tools, that you don't lead with that one all the time. But it's okay for women leaders to acknowledge we can be angry sometimes too, and still be appropriate and still be professional and still be competent leaders. So I think that's probably the piece that I really wanted to convey today is women are leaders in all aspects of community. And when it's hard, don't go find the back room to sit in. Lead through the hard moments.
I don't think politics is for anyone who's faint of heart. So I know from experience, having been asked to do some tough jobs, but the question pertained to what can I do? And I think sometimes we feel like we can't do much, but if you start in small steps, if you work on a local area and you find something you're passionate about, I think those kinds of involvement can be just as critical and meaningful as maybe running for political office or whatever. Not everyone may be cut out for the limelight or making strong political statements. There are who don't think they are, but you can get there if you work toward it and are passionate about a subject.
And I always listen differently. I mean, I feel like there's lots of women that can give business women advice. Sometimes they're going to tell you a story about something that is missing in their life, and that's a new product you could sell. Other times it's just a way they were, a situation they had in their family that now you have that knowledge to help you in dealing with a human being. So I had a lot of people like that, but there weren't very many women at the top. I think that of late, of the last, one of the things that did happen that was quite pivotal, when I was the president of Payless Shoe Source, I joined a group called the Committee of 200, which at the time was about 200 executive women around the country. Now, thank goodness, it's much more than that. And they were the ones that really convinced me. We were in a meeting in San Francisco. We were just talking about business, and I knew this thing was coming with Payless. They said, go do something on your own. Why don't you start your own business? Because many of them were entrepreneurs or had taken over their father or their husband's business and had made them even more successful. And that was the first time I really thought, well, I don't have to work for a company. I could work for myself. And so those interactions, those exchanges, when I did take the time to go out of my comfort zone and go to a women's group meeting or go to a session like this, I always walked away with that. Those people don't know so much. They do know now that they were my mentor, but they didn't realize that conversation was so pivotal because we were just listening and we were just chatting, and it was a great conversation. And sometimes that's where the best ideas come from. It's not from a formal mentoring session. It's from just being a good friend.
Especially if you are Caucasian, you really have to work to understand how other racial minorities view the world and how the world has viewed them. And you should, so we really have to read and have an emotional IQ on those topics. And So it's good to be a listener on that topic. It's good to be a reader, and a pretty prolific reader on that particular topic. And the other issue regarding gender is, I think every woman has an obligation to find other women that you can mentor, and don't wait for them to reach out to you. Reach out to them to figure out how you might serve in a role to help guide them. Because I was lucky. I had some of that along the way. And I think it's, there's a lot of talent here. So we want to share it.
It is critical that we listen, and that we listen very carefully to what people of color are trying to tell you, because they have been disparaged in many ways, and you really need to help try and understand what the issues are so that we can all work together. And I know sometimes it's difficult to talk about these issues, but it's important for us to talk about these issues. It's important for us to have a common language and a common understanding. And I think what Jean was saying about reading is very important, because it helps all of us learn more about the history of what has gone on, the systems that have been put into place that actually do disparage individuals, and we can think together about how we can work collaboratively to make this world a better place. And one thing that I have been working on, and somebody alluded to it earlier, was the documentary that I have just finished. Actually, I finished it last year. It came out in September of 2019. And it was actually a documentary of, it was actually the story of my husband, and it's called Only the Educated Are Free, The Journey of Michael A. Middleton. And actually, it's a story about him working to growing up in the segregated South and navigating a number of difficult situations as he grew up and as he worked in government and private industry and also academic institutions. And so my hope was that this documentary will inspire other generations moving forward and today, people to think about, what can I do to make the world a better place?
And I worked for a company that trained me how to underwrite, how to communicate with customers, how to ask the right questions to understand the risk analysis of what I was doing. I also learned many, many things about myself. First of all, my capabilities, how to be self-reliant, and what kind of person I really, really wanted to be. That was really important to me. Fast forward, I was able to move up the chain and become a full-fledged commercial lender at that time and a vice president of the company. And about 3 years ago, I had a owner of a company that I had worked with for many years and was very intimately involved with, asked me to come work as his CFO. At the time, I didn't feel like it was the right choice or the right move to make. But at the end of last year, I made that decision. I left banking and went into manufacturing. Within 30 days of that decision, I realized the impact of that decision. I had taken for granted in the banking world the advantages of having transparent communication from management to staff, from staff to staff, from manager to employee. And that was not happening. It was shocking to me to see how employees were treated. It was disheartening and soul chilling for me. So then COVID-19 happened. The environment went from bad to worse. And while I knew that I was capable of doing the job and learning things that I had never learned before, or did things that I had never did before, my capabilities expanded significantly, but I also knew that if I stayed there, it would take a toll on my mental health. So I started applying for jobs in banking. Now, we were in the middle of shutdown in the state of Missouri. I had no idea if there was a banking job available. I had no idea if there would ever be an opportunity in the next 6 or 9 months because of everything that was going on with our economy. Good news is I did leave and I was able to go to Guarantee Bank, and I'm thrilled to be here. But one of the things I would say is I learned in both of these turbulent times in my life that there was a lot of positive things that came out. And I learned how to be who I wanted to be and what kinds of things I wanted to do going forward and what kind of leader I needed to be. Most importantly, though, I think that I reverted back to that girl that was not afraid, that had no limitations or preconceived notions that somebody that had more experience or more tenure than me had more abilities than me, because that was not the case at all in any of these situations. And I just feel like we as women tend to limit ourselves. We allow our insecurities to bubble up and prevent us from taking that leap, or we play small, or we let the excuse of being a mother or a wife keep us from doing the things that we're totally and completely capable of.
I graduate from WashU, get my dream job as an urban planner with St. Louis County government. I'm there for about 14 years, and I go in as an entry-level planner, coloring maps, and get to the pinnacle. You know, I am the director of the department, large group of people reporting to me, reporting to the county executive, an elected position, and doing just wonderfully. And then you can see maybe behind me, the flood of 1993 happened, and we put together a team to address the flood of 1993. And it was led by the person who was the head of the highway department. It included myself and two other women. We were kind of the skunks work team for this project, for the county's response to the flood of 93. And we are in a meeting one day, and the man who's leading the team just kind of offhand tells us about the not even a bonus, just the raise he got for taking on this role. And the three women, we look at each other, we're like, and you guys know what was happening. You know who's really doing all the work on this team. It was the three of us. And, you know, we were feeding him the information to share, which actually was fine. But it's like, wait, you got a raise? You got a raise for doing this? You got more money? So I have to tell you, I didn't immediately go, I need to go ask for more money, because women don't ask generally. You know, we're like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. You've given me more money. You've given me more responsibility. You like me. But I decided I wasn't going to do that. So when I didn't go right away, but when the time came around that we were talking about raises, I looked at my portfolio of work and said, you know, I have added so much. There's been so much added to my plate that this needs to be compensated. So went to the chief of staff to talk about compensation. I've never seen any man so uncomfortable, because I don't know that anybody had ever, certainly no woman had probably ever come to him and said, I deserve to make more money. And the interesting thing was he agreed with me, but guess what he didn't do? All he did was agreed with me. Nothing else happened. It was like, well, let us look into it. We'll study it. We studied it. They studied it for probably 4 months, and I was very patient. And then I said, patience no more. And when I had the opportunity to leave, as I was tending my resignation, it was like, don't go, don't go. We'll give you more money. But it was too late, because I felt disrespected. I felt unappreciated, and I felt used, to be absolutely honest. So I left, but I left in a gracious manner. I left with, I will always be happy to come back and help, you know, lend expertise, whatever you need. And I actually did that. I continue to have a great relationship with some people. Amazingly are still there that were there when I left in 1996, but a number have left. But I have maintained those relationships. That was, you know, but and I hate this phrase, but it's like I found my voice when I walked into the chief of staff's office and said, and I never brought up the other person. I talked about myself and, you know, made the case for myself. And maybe if he hadn't agreed with me that, yes, you deserve more money, I might have been more patient. But that was the first pivot. And again, it was really listening to what, you know, I think I had heard from my mother and my father, neither of whom graduated from high school, but, you know, always said to me, live your life in a way that reflects that you know your worth and you know your value and you know your values. So that's kind of the beginning of the career that led me from urban planning to head of communications, marketing, and public affairs for a large not-for-profit healthcare system. And I had another stop in the middle. That was another pivot point because, like Kristy, I found that the values of new leadership were very much in conflict with my values. And it was time for another pivot.
The things that I found were having the ability to change position at any time is a skill, but it's because you learn from hardship. And as a county official, I was always involved in association work because I believe that you can do a whole lot more when you work together than you can by yourself and make greater change. And so I was a member of the Restaurant Association Executive Committee before I got into politics. And so then I joined the Missouri Association of Counties and the National Association of Counties. And after 2 years at the National Association of Counties meetings, I found that rural America was left out of the discussion. We weren't even at the table. It was run by large urban counties like Cook County, Chicago, or Seattle, King County, Seattle, or Dallas County, Texas. And so I decided I was going to run for president of that organization, just like that. It was a decision I had to make because there was a void, and I was willing to do it. But I want to tell you what I learned from that effort of being an officer in the National Association of Counties and working with women. I found that women were very frustrating. You know, as the president of the association, I got to appoint the chairs of the committees that then would go to Congress and be the voice of that committee at meetings. And I wanted a diverse group. I wanted people of color, of geographic, of women, men. Not one woman applied. Not one person of color applied. And it was all white men, you know, and men just think they can do anything, you know, they just go for it, where women self-select that they're not good enough. And so I had to recruit, and I got out recruiting these women, and 2 of them had been vice chairs for like 6 or 7 years of the committees I wanted to make them chair. And they were running the meetings anyway, because the men half the time didn't show up, you know? So that was really, really frustrating to me, the fact that women, for one thing, they won't go out on a limb and try to do something without somebody encouraging them. So we, as an organization, do that well. If we know there's a void and we know people that we've met through this organization, where we can help encourage them to run for office, to apply for that job, to support them as they're making that transition. And they should be, every one of you are a mentor to somebody, whether you know it or not. You know, people don't have to meet regularly. People observe by watching you in leadership. And so I really want to thank Greater Missouri Leadership for what they do. And the things that I took out of it was my party with a purpose is one thing that I did learn while I was in my class. One of my friends said, "Why are you having all these cocktail parties and don't do it for a purpose?" So from then on, I have parties with a purpose, and they're very different. They might be, I have a mentee and I want to introduce her to people that are in the public relations field. That's what her major is. And so I have a party for her with that, pulling people from that background. And I don't even know some of the people I invite, you know, so, or I bring, when somebody comes into town that's new in leadership, a woman, I have a party with a purpose for them. I'll tell you, this COVID thing has really ruined my fun, because I don't get to have those parties with a purpose right now. And it's just not as much fun over Zoom. I can tell you that. It's that entertaining that really makes a difference. So I know we can do better. And I think the thing that we need to do is reach out to women that we admire, that we see should be moving in a direction of leadership in a different way, and just encourage it. You know, just a cup of coffee. And have you ever thought about something like that? Sometimes it's all that person needs to make that step.
And then just through my doctoral program, I realized it was just time to make a career shift. And here I sit at Columbia College, if Leanne's still on, I'm putting all my strengths into place. And so I had a strategic plan. I had 4 options. Option 1 played out. So I've landed here. And I think for this job, what's really enlightened me is because as I prepare for the classes I teach, I'm constantly in data and information and what's happening. And I've always been passionate about women in leadership, but my doctoral program made me realize I focus on white women and I don't focus on women of color. And my doctoral program gave me the first time to be a minority by age and race. And I learned what it was like to be silenced in conversation. And I tell you, if you've not had that experience, it's a very powerful experience. And I feel like because of events that have happened this year, with George Floyd, which really Breonna Taylor was probably the bigger pivot point for racial conversation and social justice. And just watching what was going on around me, especially after going through Concerned Students 1950 here, I feel this just incredible sense of call to action for social justice. And so I'm kind of on this path over what's my action. Allies not good enough, action needs to happen. And so I spent, my job gives me the time in the summer to look at things. And frankly, thank goodness, because I wasn't ready for protests and things in the classroom. I needed time to educate myself. So the first thing I did was read White Fragility. And if you've not read it, especially white women, I tell you, it's a book that you need to read. Thank you, Anne. I'm going to put in chat. There's a really great reading study guide. I ended up being part of a national book dialogue through a newsletter I get, and then dialogue with a colleague. I was on a LinkedIn live with the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, and I cannot pronounce his name, which really, again, challenge my thoughts. And so for me, I feel like I'm in this constant learning, but also I'm in a place in the classroom, particularly because I teach diversity in organizations, where I can really have an opportunity to bring things to the forefront that a lot of our young people aren't aware of. And so I've become really hyper vigilant about gender and about race and equity and leveling the playing field. So I feel like that I'm pivoting into action, looking for that opportunity. And in August, I was part of a diversity conference I attended virtually, hosted here on campus. And I really loved it because the speakers were all people who were underrepresented groups. Even the faith group, there wasn't really a traditional Christian spokesperson per se. It was other faiths that didn't get attention. And at the end of the conference, their message to people like me were, white people, you created this mess. It's up to you to get us out of it.
For women of color, for people of color, and I am so glad that so many people are reading White Fragility. But you know what I would want you all to know is this is not academic. For us, this is not something that once the cameras and the protests go away, that our lives suddenly change. I have shared with my colleagues here, you know, there's a difference in being poor and white and being poor and black. And what people often don't realize is there's also a difference in being white and affluent and being black and affluent, or a person of color and affluent, because what we respond to each other by shelves. And for some of you who have heard me speak to the group before, you know, I talk about this. It's like our immediate response to people is based upon the shell that we see. So you respond to me as a Black woman of a certain age, you know, as if you know a bio as a Black woman with a certain job, but it's always as a Black woman. It is never, you know, that part never goes away. And I don't want it to go away, but I also, as it was just stated, the world was not built for me. So it's things that are happening are not academic.
And I think I just want to emphasize June's point that that to me, this is about humanity and human rights and being hyper vigilant of paying attention to what's going on around you. and to stand up for things. And I'm fearful that we've had so much more momentum now than we did 5 years ago, but that it's getting lost and we're still not taking action. So because it's kind of quieted down, the protests have quieted down. And, you know, I think companies are starting to look deeply beyond, I had some basic diversity training, to now what does this really look like, and what's this like for everyone that works for us or who's out in our community.
You know, along those same lines, I had to have a very difficult conversation about this very subject with my own family members. I had to liken it to the women's movement. That's exactly what I had to do. My family members were very adamant that this was not a white problem. And I said, how often do you walk into a room that you're the minority? How often do you have to experience being the historically excluded group? I said, I started describing some of the things I experienced as a woman so they could have a point of reference. And I think that's what we're going to have to do. It's going to be each individual responsibility to have those conversations, have those tough conversations, especially with people that you're close to. And that's going to be the most difficult ones to have. And that's where the change is going to start happening.
Back to Margaret Mead, you know, the only thing that has, and I'm paraphrasing, but, you know, people taking action, that's the only way you've ever changed society. And sometimes it's one person at a time, but, you know, if there are a lot of one people at a time who can help move us forward. So as difficult as 2020 has been, and this will sound like I'm Pollyanna on steroids, but I have actually never been more optimistic about what our future looks like. Because one thing the pandemic did for us was misery didn't like all the company that it got. And so, you know, we recognize, I think, through dealing with this pandemic that we have to function differently. So I think there's a lot of momentum for that kind of change. So, you know, I am optimistic. I'm not even cautiously optimistic. I am optimistic. There are the majority of our workforce that has to come to work each and every day. You know, they don't get the opportunity to work remotely. The vast majority of them are women. The vast majority of them have families. So we have really thought about, especially in the beginning, you know, how do we support these caregivers in ways that are of value to them. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, I mean, there was a groundswell of support for healthcare providers, not only here at BJC, but across the country. You know, they were named heroes, gift certificates, you know, things were just flying in to say, you know, we appreciate you, we support you. On the kind of policy side, we were looking at how do we make sure that people got respite as we were, you know, looking at surging numbers coming in and needing people to work long hours. How did we make sure that we had policies and practices in place that allowed people to take off at a time when you needed them? So, you know, bringing in more agency staff to help supplement was one of the things we did, because we recognized that not only were our caregivers caring for patients, they were also caring for families, and they needed time to care for themselves. And as women, I don't care what role we're in, it's something we always put ourselves last. We always put ourselves last. So recognizing that, we were trying to figure out how did we help overcome that barrier where caregivers were putting themselves last. So it's been interesting to watch this kind of, I call it a, what do you call that? Loop or a curve. You know, we were on an upswing, cases seemed to be under control, and then all of a sudden we crashed again with cases going up. And cases are now going up at the same time that people have, just like they have social justice fatigue, people have pandemic fatigue. So there's not as much, people are not being as disciplined in whether you have a mask mandate or not, but, you know, in practicing those behaviors that will help prevent community spread. So for our caregivers, it feels almost like almost very personal to them that, you know, we need you as your nurses and frontline leaders and doctors. We need you to wear the mask, wash your hands, socially distance, so that when we're taking care of your loved one, we are as safe as possible.
The theme I heard June say is COVID-19 has taught us to be more empathetic to each other. It has taught us to how to look from different ways to how to provide different avenues to continue to work for everybody. I think also we need to look at different avenues also to, like Karen was mentioning, her parties with a purpose. Could you do something like where you work with several different restaurants and everybody does it on Zoom and a technology where we're also being inclusive and helping support organizations and businesses to help them continue to thrive in this current economy. I think we need to be inclusive in every way. And I think COVID-19's helped do that.
You know, it's going to affect all of us if we don't step up as a society and get a handle on it. And I just wonder if there's a way that we could do something that could help all of our alum understand some ways to make a change.
Karen, I think that's brilliant, because what Greater Missouri Leadership Forum is, it's across Missouri. So it's not just in the urban areas. So it's kind of a way to bridge that rural urban divide. And if those of you, again, I didn't get to go through the program, you all were kind enough to honor me, but if, we could all say we support these practices, these behaviors to keep our community safe. And we are representative of women across this great state of Missouri. I think that would be very, very powerful.